if you were to say, this is Sean, this is what concerns me the most, at this time for us broadly, what would it be?
It's the fact that truth is losing. Like it's the fact that like we've had misinformation campaigns forever. Like that's been a tactic for as long as there's been politics. There's been people just putting out things, throwing 50 things on the wall, hopeful that 3 stick.
Welcome to Pod Talks. Pod Talks is a project of protecting our democracy. We bring together the best minds in New Jersey and beyond to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing our democracy, our institutions, and our personal freedoms. I'm Sean Spiller, Chair of Protecting Our Democracy. Joining us today is Marcus Sibley. Marcus is an environmental and social justice activist with a deep commitment to equity and progress. A native Newark, Marcus began his career as a family therapist after receiving undergraduate and graduate degrees in social work at Rutgers University. Marcus wears many hats in his advocacy. Currently, he's chair of the New Jersey Progressive Equitable Energy Coalition and the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut Director of Conservation Partnerships for the National Wildlife Federation, where he also works with the international team on International Equity Project, among other jobs in his role. Marcus, thank you for joining us today.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be having this conversation, and especially as our listeners and hear your path here, it's kind of unique, right? You've got a path that has brought you experiences from where you are today as climate justice, but also talking about mental health. So maybe I'd start with just how did that happen? How did you start with that space and mental health, and then kind of what caused your career path to change and where you end up now?
Well, again, thank you so much for the invitation, Sean. It really is an honor to be here to speak with you today, and just to be in this space today. As you pointed out, I got my degrees in social work. I became a family therapist, working with families, and at one point I just realized like I was doing well at what I was doing, but I just felt like my reach wasn't what it could be. I felt like there were so many more families that could benefit from these lessons I had learned experientially or in addition to scholarly. So I left that profession. I became a speaker. So I started traveling the country doing motivational and empowerment workshops at businesses, universities, high schools all across the country. And it was maybe 10 years ago now. A colleague was at one of my presentations and he was speaking to me and he said, Marcus, that was probably one of the best presentations I've ever seen. I was like, thank you so much. And he said, but I got to tell you, many of the youth in the audience, even though you were really good, they're not going to be able to retain what you just shared with them. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And he says, well, due to environmental issues, that's impacting our children and impacting their ability to retain information as well as a whole host of other things. And it really punched me in the face because it's like I work very hard to prepare myself to make sure I give good presentations that can help people, not just when they hear it, but the rest of their lives. So when I heard that young people won't have the opportunity to recall some of these, principles and practices I've shared with them, it was like a tremendous blow. So from that point, I just said, I need to learn more about the environment. And what I learned was not only from a cognitive behavioral impact, but its physical impacts. There's health complications due to environmental problems. And that just really hit home for me because I'm an activist by nature. I fight for Black and communities of color, and seeing that certain facilities are put intentionally in these communities. Just like when you think about all the different things that these communities are dealing with already, and when you add in these environmental pieces and you just see the cumulative impacts of these issues that these communities are dealing with every single day, it just forces you to get involved. So that's why I can tell you, Sean, like the people who are working in this space are really committed and really passionate about helping people because we recognize a lot of things are in silos, but when it comes to the environment, it takes into account everything. So it takes into account not only the air pollution, not only the noise pollution, not only the traffic congestion pollution, but it also brings into account the pollution of police brutality, the pollution of inadequate resources, lack of food, lack of food with good nutrients. That's why a lot of our areas are food deserts. So the environment takes into account all of that. So that's why the mental health piece is important, not only when you're speaking about the environment and the people that we're fighting for, but also for the advocates, because it's heavy. It's heavy when you're thinking about all these different things. So that's why I think it's important that even the advocates take time to take care of themselves, make sure their own mental health is intact, because this is heavy work.
Well, listen, I appreciate you focusing on that too. As somebody does that educational space well, we often say, you've got to make sure you're caring for your mental health before you care for those students as well, right? So it's important. And I'm glad you really took the time to kind of connect all the pieces there, because I think, especially for our listeners, just, how does it all connect, right? Where you started, where you ended. But I think you really spoke to the fact that the environmental justice touches upon so many things, right? It's all those things connected, and they have that major impact, right? There's some specific health things that you talk about when we talk about an asthma or adult illness, but there's also the impacts that you see all around, as you described, in so many ways when you are in overburdened communities, and we see often intentionally so the way that pollution is concentrated in those areas. So one of the other things you noted in there was, look, everybody doing this work, it's kind of all connected. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Right now, you're with the New Jersey Progressive Equitable Energy Coalition, right? And I hear coalition, it means a group of individuals coming together. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's all about and what that's working on and what the current campaigns are?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I get really excited when I speak about NJPEEC, because it's an answer. It's an answer to a problem. One of the problems that we have is environmental justice or environmental issues doesn't rank as high when it comes to our legislators. It's something people talk about, but when it comes down to really doubling down on our environment, making sure there's adequate funding, making sure that there's concurrent funding, making sure that the entities that deal with the environment are adequately staffed and have enough capacity. When it comes to those issues, when it's the environment, it's usually not up to par. And especially when we're speaking about as it pertains to our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor communities. It's never where it should be. So NJPEEC is kind of an answer to that issue. NJPEEC is a collective. It's a coalition of statewide Black and Brown environmental, social justice, labor, agricultural leaders coming together to bring one voice for energy equity. So the whole point is we do this great work in our individual spaces, but bringing that together so that when we're meeting with our president of the Board of Public Utilities, our commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, our federal entities like Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or our Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, when we're meeting with those entities, when they look and they see this collective of Black and Brown leaders who are experts in their fields, that's power. And we're trying to infuse power into these spaces, so you have to take us seriously. And I think that's a really important piece where we have our grassroots organizations who are on the ground, making sure you're aware of what's impacting these communities, in your face, loud, strong, proud, a lot of history, making sure the communities are aware of what's happening today. So the grassroots are like ultraly important to the work that we do. And they provide the momentum for what we do as a grass tops organization when we're in the meetings, having conversations with the leadership in these governing bodies. So we use the momentum from the ground. We're like the air support when it comes to a military analogy. So we work together. So our job is to use the momentum from the grassroots, be a grass tops organization in those meetings, and push the agenda of equity. So be in these rooms having real conversations about how can these entities do things more equitably? Because a lot of times there's conversations, but one thing I'm finding, many of these entities never even had an equity training. So how are you supposed to provide equitable processes for an entire state when you don't even have an equity lens developed yet. So we're very intentional about making sure our especially our legislators, helping them recognize that if you're going to create policy, you need to consider equity from the beginning. Because one of the mistakes we make all the time, Sean, is we'll bake the cake and then we'll bring in advocates at the very end and say, is this equitable? It's like, no. With anything, if you want it to be done correctly, you bring in those stakeholders from the very beginning so we can avoid the missteps that waste time, resources, and energy. So it's like we need to do better at that piece.
Yeah, well, that sounds all too familiar, right? Getting called in at the end to offer and give insights. But you talked about the organizing for power there, really, and kind of making sure that community voice is in the conversation with those in elected office and other positions. Certainly, I think you probably agree under Governor Murphy, we've seen meaningful focus on equity. We've seen meaningful focus, quite frankly, on climate change and environmental justice. We've seen progress in that space, but what do you see as community's ability to kind of continue that important push, right, to make sure it's front of mind, as you know, right, with him and others? What's the key thing? You're in a community, you're looking for that change. How do you jump into that process, as you note, right, at that organizing grassroots level to kind of help someone like you in the work you do?
I mean, I would say the first thing is being present. So many of the things that we fight for take place during normal business hours. So we have meetings, like there's hearings, there's meetings, all these things happen between 9 and 5 p.m. So the first thing we have to do, we have to continue to provide opportunities where advocates can be present. One of the biggest problems that we have is that advocates are supposed to live their normal lives and then find ways to be available in the middle of the workday. And I say that because at NJPEEC, we're making sure that we provide financial assistance for our steering committee members so that they can be present, so that if they need to take time away, if something is really important, they can reach out to their job and say, hey, I need to be off Wednesday from 1 to 3 because there's a hearing in Trenton I need to be at. So we provide that assistance to make sure that we can be present. And this is kind of a call to all organizations. We do fundraising, but it's like you can't forget the people when you're talking about who you're raising the funds for. I see a lot of fundraising, but it's not a lot of funds going to the people who need to be there. And the problem is when we don't provide opportunities for advocates with lived experience to be present, then you're going to have a skewed view. And that's just a fact. You need people with lived experience in these rooms because you can speak on behalf all you want, but it's so much more powerful to have people who are the experts side by side with the experts of lived experience. And that's one of the problems that we have in many of our state commissions and boards all throughout our state. Matter of fact, all throughout our region, is when you look at the makeup of the people who are making the decisions, it rarely ever matches the demographics of the people that they're serving. Very rarely ever does it do that. So first thing is to be present, providing opportunities for people to be present. To me, the second thing, and this is where people like you come in, we have to educate people on the problems. Like we put a lot of investment into programs, but we don't put that same investment into educating people about what the problem is. Because if more people knew what the problems were, then we'll have more people taking advantage of being proactive with taking advantage of these great programs that are offered. So one of the biggest deficits is we talk about offshore wind. We talk about the need to transition to electric, to transition away from fossil fuels. We say that we're making investments in programs and rebates, but people still don't really know why. And I think that, like the same way political campaigns, $1 million campaigns, and not just for one person, every candidate is spending millions of dollars. When you just add up how much money goes into just getting somebody elected. And I'm saying, what if that same drive, what if we had the same PACs raising money to educate people about what we need to be aware of so that we can better utilize our resources. Because I'm big on not wasting resources. I don't want a lot of energy to go into something that I know isn't going to have a high effective rate. Like I want things to be successful. So if we're going to put resources in, which are tax dollars, if we're going to do that and say we're going to help people, let's take that same time to educate. Because I think if we go across this state, Sean, if we ask people simple questions about what do you know about offshore wind? What do you know about community solar? What do you know about why we need to transition from fossil fuels? What do you really know about climate change? And I would just bet my entire paycheck that not more than 50% will be able to answer all of those questions or wouldn't have questions about those questions. And I think that is a problem. I think the messaging is a problem that we have to work on. So we can have, so to fully answer this, Sean, if more people are educated, then we're going to have more than just the advocates fighting for these things. If the people know why certain things are essential, if the people know why this is an actual climate crisis and there's things we need to do yesterday, if everyone's really aware of that, then it will be droves and droves of people making sure that they attend these hearings that are happening up in Trenton. And I think that's the next piece of the power. We can be in those meetings all day long, but until we get the full force of the people and these elected officials see their electorate standing there saying, we are fully aware of this, and if you don't do what's in the best interest of our lives, you will be out tomorrow. That's the real power. So I think that's the next step we have to take, is to really build up our forces with education. People need to know what's going on.
Well, let me ask you this question. As I'm listening to you answer that, do you think there's an intersection point, and I guess where does it lie with, as people do, learn more, right, and become more aware and try to take action? I think we've all kind of seen where, how many years ago, right, there was, a large segment of the population just denying climate change existed completely, right? We've seen maybe that come around a little bit, but you're hearing now the message shift to, yeah, but we can't do anything about it, or, it's just too expensive, or it'll just cost us too many jobs.
Right.
You also see a kind of redirection to, oh, you know what, just recycle, right? Or, reuse your water bottles, important stuff, of course, right? You see some policy, right? You see the elimination of the plastic bags, for example, in New Jersey, right? So there's some policy things that happen there too. And more and more people are moving to electric vehicles. But is there also an intersection point where people are like, well, even as I do learn more about it, it's just so overwhelming. I mean, it just seems like there's just nothing we can do, whether that be on the macro level, right? When you see, what climate change is doing in terms of storms or other damage that people are feeling and causing us, or it be on the more micro level. Oh, man, there's that incineration plant like in my backyard. How am I ever going to get that, somewhere else, or eliminate the use of it, et cetera? So I guess where does it fall with, as people become more educated, to not also have them just be inundated where they say, well, now I know a little bit more about this. It just sounds like a big issue, even when you start with it. And oh yeah, this just confirmed it. It's above me. It's beyond me. There's nothing I can do about it. How do you get that to kind of fit together, that there is something you can do, and here's how you can start doing it?
That's an excellent question. And I think, to me, the answer is, like, I have faith in the people. Like, I believe that, like, we often make decisions based on people, and we think that we know what's best for people. I'm a huge proponent of giving people information, give them the information, and allow them to do the work. Now, do I believe in, like, a dump truck approach, just dumping everything out and just say sift through it? No. I believe in bite size. So I believe in phases. Let's start at the base level. Let's define climate change. Like, let's just have a conversation, because there have been some very expensive campaigns to make sure people look at climate change as the boogie monster. And it's just this thing that comes out of nowhere. And it's just this big thing over there. And it's like, no, climate change is just an exacerbation of what's already happening. That's literally what it is. We've always had storms. Climate change is making our storms stronger. We've always had flooding. Climate change is making our flooding happen more often and more devastating. So it's when people use that narrative to create it as like this thing you should be afraid of. It's like, no, climate change is just making things worse. And recycling isn't only going to fix anything. We are too far gone to only recycle. We're at the point now where we have to make like some significant decisions, like the plastic bag ban. A lot of people didn't like that. But the point is, the plastic isn't biodegradable. It just ending up in it like disrupting our waterways and those particulates that from that plastic is going into our lungs as it over time. It's not good. We had to make a change. There's other ways we have to make significant changes in order to meet this crisis where it is. But I think the education piece of educating people, like I'm talking about real campaigns to show people like base level education about what renewable sources of energy are. What is offshore wind really? Why do we need offshore wind? What is offshore wind replacing? And is anybody going to come snatch your stove? That's the messaging. But the reality is we need education. It's like, no, none of the legislation says we're going to take anyone's stove. It is a transition. So if you have it, you will be able to keep it. So just fighting the misinformation with education. But I think having faith in the people that they can handle difficult messaging, like they can handle difficult information. I think the people can handle when we say that we want to transition from fossil fuels because fossil fuel is doing A, B, C, and D to your community as well as your health. But also, it's not something we can do overnight. So we have to make a transition away, and we have to transition the people who are working in these industries and make sure there's a just transition into something else, because we have to look after the people who lose those jobs. These are difficult things, but I think we're capable of doing anything if we have the will. And we just have to continue to educate people so they have the will when it comes to the environment, because we have will for a lot of other things. We have a will to make sure our defense is always funded. I've never seen us lose will with making sure that we have over $700 billion going into our defense budget. That is a priority. When we want to do something, we do it. I'm saying we have to fight to make sure that the environment becomes a priority, because it's literally not fair. It's not fair for people to be impacted by the water that they have to drink every day and the air that they have to breathe every day, and the food that they eat is being polluted by these toxins that are going in the dirt and then coming up in the food that we eat. It's not fair. People aren't doing anything wrong and everyone is being impacted. So because so many innocent people who aren't responsible for these problems being impacted, it needs to be a priority, Sean. It just has to be.
Yeah, what do you say? As you talked about, you've kind of touched points on a number of your answers, right? Talking about making sure that elected officials know this is a priority. We talked about priority before in terms of who decides funding and budgets. It's those who are elected. And certainly, right, you're on with protecting our democracy. So, just where do you see in these coalitions that you work through and work with, when you talk about the partnerships around having a healthy, robust democracy where everyone can participate, everyone has the time to participate, things are done at opportunities when they can lend their voice. How do all those things tie together? We talk about here the importance of having a healthy democracy, and if we're talking about healthy democracy, healthy environment, and the climate change conversation, how do you see it as all fitting together in terms of making sure that we are pushing back and seeing change in especially, yes, our communities that have traditionally been overburdened and are constantly seeing climate chanch front and center and being affected by the most. But how do you see the healthy democracy piece fitting in with the work that you do?
Well, I think politics matter, and I think democracy matters. So I think it's important to establish relationships. Like, no matter what we do over here, if we don't communicate that well to our elected officials, then the bills we're fighting for won't get passed. And it's just that simple. It is a relationship that we have to recognize, regardless of the party, regardless of anything. In order for us to make the changes that we need, it has to be legislated. So when it comes down to how do we do that? One, we have to become more political. Like our environmental organizations have to continue to make strong investments into politics so that we're having relationships. And I'm grateful that NJPEEC is a part of the Clean Energy Jobs New Jersey campaign. So that is a campaign where there is multiple groups all throughout the state coming together for one voice, and we're having those direct conversations with legislators. We're working on creating legislation that we're now trying to get a sponsor for to get passed. So it's being proactive, recognizing that we can educate people, we can organize, we can fight, but if we don't get the legislation passed, then we're going to be right back where we started. So I think us recognizing that, like when you look at these power lists throughout the state, how often do you see environmental leaders on those lists? And that's a problem, because if we're going to make change, we need our environmental leaders recognized statewide. So when they're going into these rooms, there is power, there's cachet, there are relationships that influence these legislators. Because the same way you can have a lobbyist for fossil fuels, we need to have our environmental lobbyists have that same type of power to influence the decision making. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that people scratch their head about. That makes sense. Why is that not passing? Like, there's literally a 1+1 = 2 situation. Why does it pass? It doesn't pass because there are special interests who are very well resourced, who are making sure they're staying in our legislators' ears, pointing out their perspective and influencing decisions based on their perspective. We have to become strategic and be on this other side. We have to have the resources to put our own lobbyists to be there consistently and do the same thing and point out the good. It shouldn't just be one-sided. It should be equal. So I'm saying our environmental groups have to do a little bit more strategic planning, invest more resources into lobbying, and making sure we have a lot more environmental attorneys, so that we also having more lawsuits and being client groups on special filings. Like, we have to be very strategic in this space because our opposition is extremely strategic. So it's like, if you're fighting people who are paying like teams of lobbyists, teams of attorneys, we just can't walk in that room with passion anymore. We have to walk in that room with the artillery to make sure that we are competitive so that we can change the legislation and impact lives.
Yeah, well, as you're talking about that, and you're right. Once it's at least even, then hopefully that 1+1 = 2 becomes obvious, and they act on it. What when you talk about the fact that sometimes they don't, at least currently, right, with the lobbyists pushing in other directions and other issues. What I guess last two things I would ask you is, like, what worries you most right now? Like, right, as you do the work, as you work in coalitions, as you have community conversations, as you see your successes and certainly the challenges that still remain. If you were to say, this is Sean, this is what concerns me the most, at this time for us broadly, what would it be?
Now you're getting to the I can't sleep certain nights question.
So I'm going to end on hope. So hopefully we'll get a good night's sleep at some point here. But like, yeah, what is it?
I mean, I would say it's the fact that truth is losing. Like, it's the fact that, like, we've had misinformation campaigns forever. Like, that's been a tactic for as long as there's been politics. There's been people just putting out things, throwing 50 things on a wall, hopeful that 3 stick. That's just politics. That's just anything. The thing that makes me very nervous is that, like, the amount of misinformation and the lack of fact checking, it's scary, because we have data. Like, we have data pointing to not just asthma, not just impacts when it comes to your cognitive abilities and able to retain information. There's also infant mortality that's being impacted. There's also cancer that's being impacted. It's also autism that's being impacted. There's many. There's also new studies speaking to Alzheimer's. There's like many health implications that are these are facts. There's data proven. There's pesticides leading to cancer. It's so much information that we're well aware of, and people who have the resources are able to just put out things saying, no, that's not true. And then there's no follow-up, and people take those things as fact. And we see this in politics all the time, where people are just throwing out anything without any type of factual basis. And that's actually making people gain points in polls, even though we know full well that they're not telling the truth. So that's the scariest part for me, because we work like NJPEEC, we try to be very data driven. Like we're passionate advocates, but we try to make decisions based on what the data is telling us. And the data is very clear about the impacts of climate change. It's very clear about, if we don't transition from fossil fuels, what is going to happen to our planet. It is very clear that our ozone layer is depleted to the point where it is not going to be able to contain those gases, and our weather is going to be all out of whack very soon. That's very clear. So when we have people continuing to have these misinformation, disinformation campaigns, and those things are trending and it's working, that's really scary, because it's a lot of people who we're fighting for who are the loudest ones against the things that are going to help them. And that is the scariest thing in the world, when you see people fighting against their own best interest. It's amazing. Like, it's amazing. And there's people who are going to benefit financially, who are giving the marching orders to the people who are losing in many more ways than one. They're losing, but they've been influenced to be out there fighting against their best interests. And that's just really scary to me. Like, it's really scary to me.
I mean, I think especially, politically, we see people going into their camps or their teams. You see, impact of social media on misinformation, as you note, and some of these other things. I guess I'd ask you then, do you think the model of we talked earlier about education, right, being key? If there's such easily disseminated misinformation, disinformation, do you see education being a way? Can it still get through? Can you still, how do you educate then if people are looking for information, looking to be educated, but they're very quickly gaining it from places that are just giving them complete misinformation? How do you do that in that environment?
Well, I mean, I would say I feel there's two major ways that we can impact that. One, we get to people younger. We get into our schools, as we're speaking about education. We're New Jersey is leading now in our climate education, and we need to make sure that not only do we just have that, but our young students are learning about what environmental justice means. Why is there a justice piece when we're speaking about the environment? We need to educate our young students earlier, so they have a grasp of the information. And I think that means not only being taught in schools. They need, the same way we have field trips to a museum, let's have a field trip to a waste incinerator. Let's let our kids see. Let's make sure our kids get outside and see the importance of being outdoors, and the importance of caring about trees, and making sure our parks are well maintained and are accessible. Let's educate our young children so that they have that information as they matriculate. I think that's very important. I think that's very doable. I think there's we have a lot of roadblocks when it comes to introducing our children to different things. But like, no, we have community partners, we have churches, we have mosques, we have organizations. There can be a lot of partnerships to make sure our young children are educated and have transportation to get out to these different places. That's the first thing. Second thing is, to me, is making sure information is everywhere. And I go back to the campaign model. When someone is running for office, you see flyers in the barbershops, in the salons. You see flyers at the supermarket where people go. You see advertisements on the television. You hear ads on the radio. You have trusted messengers, celebrities, etc., speaking about these different people. They exhaust all media platforms because they want you to know about this candidate. I think we need to have that same approach when it comes to environmental education. People need to know about these things. It needs to be a priority. I think, and we submit things to the Department of Environmental Protection anytime there's a law coming out. When there's rules, we submit rules. One of the things that NJPEEC submitted when we were submitting our comments was the same urgency when a child is missing, where people get a text message. Everyone gets a text message with information. We feel if there's polluted facilities coming to someone's house, coming to someone's area, and people know that there's going to be potential cumulative impacts of health complications, we feel that's urgent too. So why not utilize that same notification system to notify people of something that could be impacting health coming to your town? This is the date of the hearing. Make sure you make it a priority to be there so you can be heard. I think we need to work harder at getting information to the people, because I can tell you right now, Sean, we have some very archaic practices in place today when it comes to notification. There's some agencies, the notification means an advertisement in a newspaper, when I don't remember the last time I purchased a newspaper. I don't know about you, but I haven't purchased a newspaper in a long time. And the other piece is they'll put something on a website. So that's assuming everyone has access to that website. That's assuming that people even know what that website is. So there's a lot of assumptions in our archaic practices that we need to get away from to make sure we're working harder to get the information to the people. So my plea to everyone I speak to is we can raise and we can fundraise and we can manage millions and billions of dollars to make sure candidates get into office. And I don't mean just, even school board, like whatever candidates, people spend money on campaigns. We can recognize the importance of having that name recognition is why we put flyers everywhere. If we know for a fact that mothers going through all the pain of bringing the child to term, and then that child is born, or they maybe not be born because of environmental impacts, or we have seniors who are having health complications because respiratory issues due to environmental impacts. When we know many people all across our state are getting sick because of the water that is coming out of their pipes, when we know there are things that are impacting people's quality of life, if quality of life can't be a necessity that we invest in the same way we do politics, then we have to question our humanity. And that's something we really need to think about. If we know people are being impacted and we're not giving every resource that we give over here, because it'd be different if we didn't have a model already. But if we have a model of how to get information out across all mediums, and we're not utilizing that when our residents are being impacted every day, we have to question our humanity.
Well, what then with that gives you hope? What right now is what inspires you that does allow you to say, yeah, you have those sleepless nights when you worry about these pieces, but what also says, you know what, I'm confident we're going to be successful. I know we're going to, come through this on the other side with the outcomes we want. What encourages you to feel that way?
I mean, I'm always going to be a big picture. I'm always going to want more impact. Like I said, I was a therapist working in an office, and I wanted more impact, so I became a speaker. Like, I'm always going to want that. But I also recognize every effort is important. So even though you may want to do all this and that, every single effort, every person that we impact their quality of life matters. So I know all throughout the state, we have people like myself who are advocates, who are influencing policy, influencing practices, influencing culture, educating families, educating young people. Those young people are coming home and then educating their families. It is a ripple effect anytime you show someone a better way. So what gives me hope is, one, the work we're doing to ensure that justice is involved in the environment is going to save a life. Like, knowing that there will be a life saved because we're making sure people aren't just focusing on the DI part, but they're understanding that there's a justice component to what we're doing. knowing that someday someone's going to benefit. And it may not be today, may not be tomorrow, could be 20 years from now. But knowing that we're planting seeds, that's can put a smile on your face. So I would encourage everyone, never worry about what you don't see today. Just do the work. You don't know what impacts you're having on someone. You don't know what nugget you may embed in someone's mind, that a couple life experiences happen and then they finally can see what was being said 10 years ago. You don't know what seeds you're planting. So just keep working. Just keep working, keep working, keep working, stay positive. But I encourage our funders and I encourage our organizations, make investments in the people so the people can be present, because we need people in those meetings to fight. We like the meetings aren't going to wait until people get off of work, or no, we need people available when the meetings take place. That means we have to make an investment in the people to be there to advocate for the people.
Yeah. Well, listen, Marcus, know this. I think you don't have to wait to some future date. The work you're doing, the work that so many are doing, is making a difference right now, saving lives right now, making a difference in lives right now. And we know that collectively, we're going to all keep making sure that we do that into the future as well. So thanks so much for taking the time and really spreading this message and having the conversation today and helping with that piece of education. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. Hope everyone has a great weekend. And make sure, as the mental health piece, we're all under different stressors. Make time to go outside and take some really deep breaths of clean air. Just
there you go.
You gotta settle yourself. So that's why we gotta fight to make sure the air is clean, so we can have those mental health breaks.
I got the full connection on that right away. So, listen, thanks again. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.